Hello, students. In our poetry, we have different types of poems, and we need to go through the different poetic movements and concepts. And under this realm, we have modern developments in the poetry too. In when we discuss about the American literature, we have to think about the modern American literature and the subsequent movements that comes up in the history. So, the modern age that is said to have begun right from the 20th beginning of the 20th century, some of the remarkable features that were working in the late 19th century. But irrespective of these developments, we have typically different types of realms and literary features and modernism working at the very basic of the human society. As we have gone through the avant-garde, avant-garde is also a literary movement that mostly originated and popularized in European countries. Avant-garde is to make new. For the French meaning is to make new. Everything to make new. So, under this realm, we have seen there are various other features that were typically made new. So, the new experiments, whether it occurs in the poetry, novel writing, or other forms of literature, this avant-garde has popularized the postmodern way of writing poetry. Confessional poetry is also one of that type of poetry to make it new or to modernize. Confessional poetry is also a style of poetry. It is very much personal, and confessional poetry very often makes the first person narrator. Written after 1950s, the origin of the confessional poetry needs to be looked at the special attention to American poet Robert Lowell's life studies, which appeared in 1959. The reviewer Rosenthal has described Lowell as moving beyond what other poets had written about. The poets who write in the confessional mode very closely sharing one's emotion that naturally occurs in their heart. The heart is revealed, the heart thought revealed, first hand experience, first hand emotions are revealed in their poetry. The poems are personal or heartfelt confessions to engage the personality. So, it breaks the barriers of traditional and idealized poetic figure. Life Studies by Robert Lowell is just a conduit of the creation of the confession. We have confessional poetry just as modernism pushed back against the traditional forms of poetry. Prior to these so-called decades of 1960s, there was a reaction to confessional poetry from the writers. These poets saw this movement not as a sentimental or self-indulgent, but they are set aside due to some kind of a deeper and frustrating experiences. So, it's the term that is tagged as confessional poetry. So, the movement confessional poetry is emotionally poignant, brought the tortured themes, heartfelt, suffering, painful memories of their personal lives, heartfelt emotions, and such writers are like Robert Lowell and Sylvia Plath. They are Annie Sexton. They are a great deal more who often go underappreciated and made an important contribution to the particular movement. So, this two poet who deals with the facts and intimate mental and physical experiences of her or his personal private life. Much of the confessional poetry was written in rebellion against the demand of impersonality of poetry by T.S. Eliot and the new critics. By its secular subject matter, it differs from the religious and spiritual autobiography. Just as we see the spiritual autobiography is St. Augustine's Confessions. It also differs from other poems like self-revelatory, first person or subjective poetry. It also differs from the romantic traditions of individualism. It definitely represents poet's own circumstances, experiences, and feelings, as we have seen in William Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Dejection and Ode, in the candor and sometimes startling detail with which the confessional poet reveals their private and clinical matters about himself or herself. There are sometimes sexual experiences, suicidal experiences, mental anguish, illness, suicidal impulses are finding the scope under this type of poetry. So, confessional poems were written by Allen Ginsberg, Sylvia Plath, and Annie Sexton. John Berman and other few American poets who tried their hand in writing the confessional poetry. So, the examples that we see, if we can discuss the confessional poetry in the without the work of Sylvia Plath, it will be injustice to this term. See, her poetry are penned down some of the best and most skillful crafted examples of the style that still resonate at a deep level with contemporary lovers of poetry. Although her poetry may cause some kind of distrust, but at the same time her poetry is revelatory and much more exciting as well as interesting, like Daddy, Lady Lazarus, Nick and Candlestick, Morning Song. These poems by Sylvia Plath is deeply noted for its autobiographical elements. The way she was willing to show what her true emotions are, no matter of their complexity. Her subject matter are often reflected her states of mind. The reader can find examples of her personal battle with the depression that she suffered. She felt Ted Hughes as a patriarchal and undermining her poetic potential, creative potential, and that she cannot wish, that she cannot try to say, she cannot try to live in the company of his. She wished to liberate and explore her her creative talent. She moves through the poem depicting her father in a variety of ways. Her father immediately died when she was just 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old. She moves through the poem depicting her father in the diary. The most well remembered is her description of him as a Nazi officer. Soon, soon the grave it will be at home for me. Lady Lazarus is also one of the finest examples that she brought. There are references to the mythology. Lady Lazarus is a mythical figure. It stands for the rebirth. Plath discusses her attempt to take her own life, but she wished the resurrection rather than failures. The piece becomes, this poetic piece becomes even more poignant, and one considers that Plath did die by suicide 2 years before this poem was published. There are few more examples that we see. A Country Life, this poem is by Randall Jarrell, Amends by Adriana Rich, Annie Sexton, For My Lover Returning to His Wife, is an example of this so-called confessional poetry. So beautiful examples that we see. For the deeper layer of the meaning, we of course have the different types of variety in their writing. So, analysis of My Lover Returning to His Wife by Annie Sexton will bring us more closer to the sentiments of the lover, of the wife, or as a poet or as a wife. So, this 48-line poem, For My Lover Returning to His Wife by Annie Sexton, the poem is contained within one block of text. Sexton has made impactful use of anaphora when we see the style of writing. The poem, the speaker in the poem describes her lover as a great relationship with his wife. She thinks of the wife as having been crafted fit to live with him. The speaker should not compete with her. The images of a lover's relation convinced her to let go of his heart. So, like this, she is all there. She was melted carefully down for you. Fireworks in dull middle of February, as real as the cast iron pot. The section is a short one but impactful statement that she made. The woman is different one, but the presence is vastly felt. She goes on to list all the reasons the listener should be more dedicated to his wife than he is to her. So, like this, we do have these types of so-called poetic expressions that we see in the form of poetry. So, to find out the heartfelt emotions directly conveyed through the poetry in the confessional poetry is one of the basic feature of this poetry. The poetic images are directly related to her first impressions that the theme or the idea or the concept has made on her mind. So directly the images are brought onto a piece of paper in the form of poetry. So we have different varieties of poetry, and this variety is very much dexterously and stylistically modeled by the very adroit and skilled poet that is Sylvia Plath. So Sylvia Plath's very great confessional poet from American perspective. We have Indian poet like Kamla Das, who also tried her hand to draft and write the confessional poetry. So we will go through the Sylvia Plath's poem when we study this particular term. With these words, I hope this short term, but it will definitely help you to cast a bigger perspective and write broad type of answers and questions and papers. See, let's go through this particular term and then we will study this so called poetry by her. Thank you.